Today, we're jumping right into a really tough debate happening in Australia. It's this big clash between national security, free speech, and national identity. And, it was all set off by just one incredibly powerful speech in Parliament. And this was the line that lit the fuse. An Australian senator stood up and said this, and bam! A conversation that had been bubbling under the surface for a long time just exploded into the open. It's forced the whole country to ask some really uncomfortable questions. Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with the senator's warning itself. Then, we need to talk about the group that's right in the middle of all this. From there, we'll zoom out and look at the bigger picture of Australia's multicultural society. And finally, we'll get into the real heart of the matter, this constant tug of war between security and our basic freedoms.
So let's get into it. And you've got to understand, this wasn't just some regular political speech, This was a direct shot, framing a specific ideology as a major threat to the Australian way of life. It basically took all these simmering tensions and brought them right to a boil.
So what were the accusations exactly? Well, the speech really went after this one group, Hizb ut-Tahrir, and threw some heavy labels at them, calling them an extremist terrorist organization, accusing them of celebrating the murder of Israelis, and saying they want to create a global caliphate. The speech argued their ideas are totally incompatible with Australian values, that they're stirring up trouble with university students, and are a direct threat to democracy itself.
Okay, so that's a lot to take in. To really understand what this whole debate is about, we've got to dig into the organization at the center of it. Who is Hizb ut-Tahrir, and what are they actually aiming for?
Well, according to them, they see themselves as a political organization, not a religious one. And their goal? It's huge. They're working towards creating a single global Islamic state, a caliphate.
And that's the caliphate the senator was talking about. So, what is it? It's basically one giant Islamic state, governed by a supreme leader, all under a very specific interpretation of Sharia law. And, that's a system that's fundamentally different from a secular democracy.
And this is where you really see the two sides clashing. On one hand, you have Hizb ut-Tahrir saying, hey, we're just a nonviolent political movement, we're just using our freedom of speech. But on the other hand, you have critics, like the senator, who look at their rhetoric and say, no way, this ideology is a serious security concern.
And to make their case, critics pointed to specific examples. A big one was this 2017 video that got a lot of attention. In it, members apparently endorsed husbands beating their wives. And that, of course, raised huge red flags about how their teachings clash with Australia's own laws on domestic violence. But, something like this doesn't just happen in a vacuum. To really get it, we need to pull back the camera a bit and look at the broader national context. What modern, multicultural Australia actually looks like.
And this is a really important point the senator tried to make. The criticism wasn't aimed at all Muslims in Australia, who make up about 3.2% of the population. The speech was very careful to distinguish between the ideology of this one specific group and the vast majority of Australian Muslims, who are, of course, just law-abiding citizens.
You also have to remember the history here. These warnings are being heard in a country that's been deeply affected by terrorist attacks on its own soil. Events like the Lindt Cafe siege in Sydney, they've left a lasting mark on the country's psyche and have directly shaped its security laws. So that's the backdrop for this entire debate.
In all of this, the speech, the group, the history, it all leads us to this incredibly difficult tension at the heart of the whole thing. It's a challenge that honestly isn't just for Australia. It's something pretty much every democracy is wrestling with today. So, on one side, you have the argument for restriction. The thinking here is that the government's number one job is to protect its people and its constitution. So, if an ideology comes along that wants to tear down that democracy, well, the government has a duty to stop it.
But then, on the other side, you've got this core democratic principle, right? The idea that a truly free society has to protect all speech, even the ideas we find offensive or unpopular. The argument is that if you start banning groups, you might just drive them underground, and in the process, you could end up chipping away at the very freedoms you were trying to defend in the first place. It's a real slippery slope.
So, how do you walk that tightrope? With these two really important ideas pulling in opposite directions, what's the path forward for a country like Australia?
Well, Australia's approach has really been twofold. On one hand, they have some pretty strong counterterrorism laws in place to deal with any immediate threats. But on the other hand, they're also investing in community programs and social integration policies, basically trying to tackle the roots of radicalization before it can even start.
And that's why this isn't just a story about Australia. It's a perfect snapshot of a challenge that nearly every modern, diverse democracy is grappling with right now. How do you keep your country safe without giving up the very things that make it a free and open society, like diversity and freedom of speech?
And so, in the end, that fiery speech in Parliament and the debate it sparked, it all leaves us with this one big, lingering question. It's a question that doesn't have an easy answer. How can a democracy protect its own values without sacrificing the very freedoms that define it in the first place? It's the ultimate balancing act, and it's a test that democracies are facing every single day.